working for me.
Worth the
I was at a big record company.
And are you Mayor or Mar?
Mar.
Like Bill Maher.
For reasons that
Thanks. No one ever asks me.
Really?
They just say mayor.
people just kind of keep it.
Mar, like it's soft. Or not Maher.
No, I think it probably really is Maher from Ireland, but
Oh, right on. A nice Irish boy.
not really. Italian.
Just like this.
Cool.
So we're going to get started. Welcome everybody. We're going to jump right into this. My name is John Bruce. I'm the director of the BBA program in Strategic Design and Management. Welcome. Thanks for coming out. Great to see everybody. I'm going to quickly introduce our guests and then hand it over to our moderator, and we'll jump right into it. So I'm thrilled, and first I want to thank a couple of people. Thank you to Logan Rydell in the back of the room, who organizes these events. He's done an amazing job of putting this together, and also to the University Student Center and the School of Design Strategies for supporting these events. I'm going to introduce Andrew Last, who's one of our full-time faculty member. Casey Marr, one of our esteemed guests tonight, is Executive Director of Design at MAC Cosmetics. He's a Parsons BBA alum from the class of 1996. Casey's role at MAC involves conceptualizing and implementing the creative design direction of MAC's cosmetics advertising, trend forecasting, and artist creative content, which includes individuals like FKA Twigs, Rihanna, and Miley Cyrus. He's also in charge of leading marketing and sales teams and presentations to retailers such as Saks Fifth Avenue, Harrods, Bloomingdale's, and more. Prior to MAC, Casey has contributed his creative wit to an impressive roster of clients, which includes, but is not limited to, Cole Haan, W Hotels, De Beers Diamonds, the New York Times, Architecture Magazine, Land Rover, Condé Nast, and David Bowie X, the Highline Art and Music Festival. So it's a pretty impressive roster there. On the end, we're happy to have and welcome Sarah Stubbs, Director of Brand Creative at Victoria's Secret, and a Parsons BBA alum from the class of 2003. Sarah's role at Victoria's Secret involves defining and evolving Victoria's Secret's brand identity through positioning projects, seasonal concepts, launch initiatives, and trend forecasting. Her position oversees and creates the digital and print work that shapes product, marketing, and overall public perception of the brand. And as the brand leader, Sarah hires and manages talent and travels extensively to both domestic and foreign locations for business. So prior to her position as Director of Brand Creative at Victoria's Secret, Sarah was a concept designer for apparel and shoes, as well as senior designer for brand creative at Victoria's Secret. Before Victoria's Secret, Sarah was communication manager at Maison Mel, and associate buyer at Tiny Park Consulting. Thank you for joining us, Sarah. In the middle, we have James David Goldmark, and he's a partner, former creative director, and now director of marketing at Hudson and Company Limited, a strategic marketing and business development firm based in New York, specializing in film, music, fashion, and lifestyle brand sectors. So after graduating from Parsons, he began his career working at the very famous Mad Dogs and Englishman Agency on important campaigns such as Snapple and Guinness. He was soon recruited to work directly for industry loon search Chris Blackwell, best known as the founder of Island Records and the man who discovered Bob Marley and U2, among many other historical artists and musicians. After 4 years working for Mr. Blackwell, James joined Hudson and Company Limited, where he's led and managed successful campaigns for clients such as HBO, Visa, Goldman Sachs, NBC Universal, Netflix, Eddie Bauer, Ford, Time Warner, Fortune, Patagonia, Lacoste, L'Oreal, Anheuser-Busch, Blue Moon Brewery, Sky Vodka, Hard Rock Cafe Hotel Group, among others. That's quite a list as well. Thank you, James, for joining us. And Andrew Robinson, full-time faculty member at the School of Design Strategies. He's taught in many programs at the School of Design Strategies and elsewhere in the university, including the BBA, the MS in Strategic Design and Management, the Integrative Design programs, and the School of Constructed Environments, and I'm sure many, many others that I'm leaving out, right? He's currently the Assistant Director of Fashion Marketing. He's also the Creative Director of Arts and Crafts Research Studio. He's spent nearly 17 years in brand and digital advertising, and he's worked with clients such as L'Oreal, Lowe's, Goldman Sachs, and Chanel. All right, so that is where I'm going to step aside and leave it to this really amazing panel.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, Casey, Sarah, and James, thank you for coming tonight, and thanks for joining us, and thanks, John. That was a lovely introduction. So I wanted to first open it up to you guys to kind of hear. You've got a panel of people who have wildly different but really interesting backgrounds, representing things as far as beauty and fashion and retail and even entertainment and marketing and branding. What kind of questions do you want to talk about? Maybe we can carve out some themes. I have my own, but this is a school, so we should have a dialogue. Is there anything you guys want to? Yeah, what do you got? Oh, sure. Hi.
So, hi. As many of us are students, like either soon to graduate or in our last semester, a lot of us are looking at our portfolios and tailoring them and trying to figure out, the entry point into these industries. So, if you guys could talk about like either the things you're looking for when you hire, or like when you're generally what you guys look for, or like your career trajectories, like how you guys found your entry point and the kind of things that along that nature.
Cool. All right, cool. What's your name, by the way?
Senior.
Thanks. And you had your hand raised, right?
Yeah. Hi. My name is Ashim. I graduated in December from the BBA program as well. And when I graduated, I think the hardest question that I had to answer from employers was, what does strategic design and management mean? And like that was obviously like, and for a lot of different paths, whether it's fashion, whether it's art, whether it's user experience, whether it's technology, it was kind of hard to kind of tailor and find the right path. And that was kind of became clear from junior year to senior year. How did you guys, from graduating a couple years back, explain what design management is, and how has that affected your career?
Yeah,
That's
charming,
awesome.
charming. You'll do fine.
Those are good questions. What else we got? Anything else? Hi.
Hi, my name is Maggie. I'm going to be a senior next year,
Awesome.
so looking down graduation.
Okay.
But I mean, kind of going off of Ash's question is, what is our role? I mean, as a strategic designer then, And if I call myself a strategic designer, what does that mean? And what kind of roles am I looking for when I graduate? Is it marketing? Is it project management? Like, where do you see someone like me fitting into your team?
Okay. All right, cool. Those are good. So basically, what are some of the roles that are out there in the field today? And maybe how are the things that you guys are learning? By the way, some of the people on this panel were in the program, that's 96,
Yeah.
97. So the program is a little different today. But I was actually teaching here back then, believe it or not. So I kind of know what you guys learned. But I think these are all fair questions. Yes, sir.
So how does business and design come together in your occupations? How is that a skill that kind of makes you stand out from others? Because I mean, it's kind of like a unique thing from Parsons, and I feel like even back in '96, business was still a strong part of the BBA program. So I'm curious on how having both minds works.
That's great. Good question. Anything else? Okay, that's a pretty good place to start. I guess maybe I'll try to answer some of that, and then I'm going to open up the panel. But I'm curious, one of the questions that I have for you guys is, when you left, because this is kind of the theme of the night, how did you kind of make a path into a career? Now, when I left school, when I was your age, I graduated and freaked out a little bit, and then had like a billion different jobs. That was just the nature of the beast back in the late 80s and early 90s. And part of that was about trying to figure out what that strategic plan would be for myself. I didn't have this kind of program that didn't exist back then. And it was interesting to find ways to carve out a path for myself as a young designer and artist. Working in technology and working in fashion and working in retail, this is my pathway, as well as some other really crazy places. So it felt a little bit anxiety producing, as I imagine some of you might run into. But for me, it was also really exciting because it wasn't this linear path into a career that was predestined for me. I don't think that really exists. I'm just curious, how did that play out for you guys? I mean, I think each one of you had a bit of a kind of a roundabout way into where you got. Sarah, how did you end up doing what you're doing at Victoria's Secret?
Sure, I was going to say the same thing, that it wasn't linear at all. And I think that it's not like you're going to graduate and you're going to pop out as like, I'm a communications designer, or I'm going to be a strategist at an ad agency. I think part of your 20s and after you graduate, a big part of it is figuring out what you don't want to do to figure out what you do want to do. And I think that's a good thing. It's trial and error. And we all have, conceptions about, oh, what is marketing really like, or what is, sales like. But I think really until you are in it, or you intern there, or you get a job, do you really have a sort of feeling for it, what is like day to day. So when I graduated, I actually was working. I always worked in retail, which I highly recommend doing that. I mean, I work in the brand side, but having retail experience is wonderful, I think, for understanding customers, mindset, also for being able to sell something. So no matter what you do, we'll all end up selling something in some respect, right? Whatever job you end up in. So that's great experience there. And I was working for Marc Jacobs there, and I kept that job on for a while because, again, I was a little overwhelmed about where do I go and what's my direction. And I ended up getting a job just through a family friend sort of thing at a small lifestyle sort of clothing company. And it was an amazing experience for me because I got to do everything from communications to processing web orders to writing a little bit of PR, but it was a very skeleton team. There was 3 of us and learning on the go. So that was a wonderful experience. And from there I started helping her out with, she had a buying company. So we used to source product and buy it for Andre Ballage's hotels. He owns Standard and Chateau Marmont. So again, taking all these different disparate sort of jobs all together and creating this experience. And then I moved on to another small brand, did PR. That was not for me. I was not good at it. Sales, again, I didn't love it. I was going, doing showroom appointments, traveling with collections. That wasn't for me either. So
I think those little moments are so important. I mean, I worked for a really weird time in a Hollywood talent agency where they would throw water bottles at your head if you brought them the wrong brand. I mean, that's real. That really happened. Not to me, but it really happened.
totally.
And I learned really quickly that this was not what I wanted to do. But interestingly, at that time, I also got to work on some really fascinating stuff around user experience. And I got to work on something that I thought was fascinating. It was about figuring out how to help this business deal with all of its contracts and communications. And it might seem silly, but it literally came down to, how do I get a phone call from Cher to turn into a contract? And at the time, it was radical. An email with voiceovers attached to it. This was a long time ago. And that led to a career for me. I'm curious, we were talking before you started, Casey. You came here thinking you wanted to study sculpture.
Yeah.
And then you kind of made a big shift. And things kind of have really, I think, in a really interesting and natural way, progressed into a fascinating career. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. In high school, I was obsessed with Andy Warhol, and I loved the idea of art and commerce together and how you could make art but sell it. And I obviously wanted to make money, and I also loved art, and sculpture didn't really fit that mold. So I came here and I started working at a small ad agency because I figured whatever I do just has to be a cross-section of brands I like or art, something artistic that I like, merged with something business. And I kind of just threw myself into an ad agency not really knowing what that was or what I would do. And I just started working in the art department, and soon I was doing mechanicals and designing ads. And from there, I went and opened my own agency, design agency. Just like said, screw it, I'm gonna do this myself. And I think that the one thing I learned and what I've seen from every place I've ever worked is if you are willing to do everything, so you're willing to send out a FedEx, do an ad, write a press release, just be willing to throw yourself into absolutely anything, you stand out amongst everyone considerably. So a lot of people, they study economics, right? So they go to school, they do amazing job at economics, they know economics like the back of their hand. And their whole career, they take jobs in economics. But if you're willing to throw yourself and use your creative skills at anything, you always stand out. Like you always are, like if you can take your creativity and put it towards sculpture, graphic design, fashion, you're creative. You're creative in all things. So that's, I think, what's made me sort of pop out of every company that I've worked at. And
it's interesting. I mean, it reminds me of something that Bill Buxton said. Bill Buxton helped to invent the Moog synthesizer, and he does a whole bunch of other stuff, including working with Microsoft to help them try to envision the future of their products. It's a really interesting guy. And he talks about sketching and design as an incremental tool of thinking. And he talked about the way that he forms his teams, these kind of cross-functional teams, that what he looks for in people that he hires onto his teams are people who know one thing really deeply and a lot of things really broadly. And I remember talking to him and I said, well, you know, for example, what? And he goes, I don't care if it's knowing piano really deeply and user experience really broadly, or vice versa, but I want you to know something really deeply because each of us can draw from that in our work. And I was curious, I'm just going to keep doing this, James. What was that like for you as you had maybe a little bit more of what seemed more of a focused resume when I looked at it? And we don't really know each other, so I'm just curious. What was that experience like for you? Was it as linear and...
Well, I came out of school not really knowing what discipline I wanted to work in as a strategic design manager. I thought I wanted to, I knew that I was a little bit even more adept to the business side of things, even as a Parsons School of Design student from the start. All I did in terms of how I got into the business in the beginning was I was interning at Mad Dogs while I was still a student. And when I left, when I graduated, I continued interning. When availabilities open up, you see people leaving, you watch everyone about to shift one step forward. You are on site and in the perfect position to make your pitch. And if you have been responsible and accountable and noticeably a team player up to that point, most label side clients, which is my language these days, I'm sorry, they you know, they'd rather hire internally than go through the process of having to figure out which stranger might be perfect for this role. So in summation, what I'd say is, you know, don't be afraid to be an intern. Don't be afraid to take positions that you don't think are perfectly suited for what you're going to be doing with your life. I think it's actually good news to know that what you're about to do in the next year or two after you graduate has absolutely no bearing on what you're going to be doing in the long term.
What was that first job for you?
My first job was just an assistant art director after I got, you know, there was an art director opening. I went for it. They said, we don't think you're quite ready to be an art director, but we're going to make you an assistant on a few different accounts. One of them was Guinness, which was the very first one. And, you know, you just, all you do is you show up every day, you keep your emotions balanced.
That's not a
That's
small
a great
issue.
advice.
I was saying to Sarah and Casey before we were here, you know, a lot of the road to success is paved with your colleagues screwing up. You know what I mean? So you just, you know, it's like playing golf. I don't know if any of you golf in here, but golf is a game of the least mistakes. So, you know, the best thing to do is to do your best, show up, be a team player. When things don't go your way, I mean, we all have artistic temperaments here. We all are sure that, you know, we're going to change the world, and you know, and I was just speaking with Sarah here. Sarah's job, as do all of ours are, you're going to be so surprised how many sign-offs you have to get on everything you do. Nothing is going to be your own vision. It's going to be a collaboration of everyone's vision, and it's the people who know how to navigate that process, act maturely, directly out of school, that float to the top. And I would say that the three of us are here probably because we didn't have a hissy fit when we were 24 years old saying, you know, I'm telling you, I know what I'm talking about. I went to the PARSONS School of Design. You know what I mean? You will have your chance to shine. Sit back, take what you can get for now, and
Work hard.
you heard all of our CVs as introductions in the beginning. Nothing you do tomorrow is going to give you a CV like that. The only thing you can do is time. It's an accumulation of small steps, time after time after time after time.
Right.
And
You know, it's interesting because it reminds me of
Yeah.
two experiences that are very much about that scenario you set up. One was at William Morris, a talent agency, where they threw water bottles at people's heads, and they had what's called a mail room. It's the trainee program, and I was actually in charge of training them on the computers. That was my job back then. And they would come in, and I would watch these kids your age come in, and they would be pushing a mail cart and kind of grumble and resent it. And they didn't last that long. And the people who kind of just like showed up early with the mail cart, ready to like, hey, here's the script that I just got. And then they give them a script to read, and then they'd give them a little project here and there. And it led to this kind of ladder that you climb. And that's, you know, I know people talk about this like it's, you know, like it's a real thing. It's a real thing, you know.
he's really right. I mean, it's the people who are on site and show up first, even if they're not doing groundbreaking work every day.
Right. There was this
Eventually,
one,
you find your moments.
Yeah.
You're ready for them. You know,
So-
you're content with what you've got,
Right on.
and then your moment comes and you meet it or not.
So what was that moment for you, Sarah? Did you have a moment like that?
I don't think I have one definitive moment.
I had a bunch of them.
Yeah.
I had a few. Yeah,
I had
well, you
I
know
don't
it.
have one that sticks
Yeah.
out for me.
No, I think I had one. This is so embarrassing, but I'm going to tell you anyways. My first job in New York City when I moved here was to work for this place called Catering a Go-Go. And it was like dietetic brownies for models on modeling shoots. That was actually my job. And you know what? I met so many amazing people, and that job led to a less embarrassing job, working for who I didn't know who this person was, but this guy named Michael Kors, who bought us McDonald's for lunch, and he wasn't very rich, and I think he had just gone bankrupt or something. Anyways, he was launching a new collection, and I was there, you know, like hammering and building sets for him. And it was all about building relationships and trying to build goodwill with people.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add something to what you said. It made me think of something. You know, there's always going to be somebody better than you at your job, and there's always going to be somebody worse than you at your job. And the interesting thing about that is, if you really are just yourself and you act like yourself and keep your emotions in check, but really just be true to who you are, that you have no idea how far that goes. Like, there's so many people, you know, struggling and fighting and trying to be something, but if you just be and be yourself, it says a lot.
I couldn't agree more. Just to even paraphrase, I'd say, someone asked in the beginning, how would you separate yourself for something when you're applying? May sound cliched, and it's easy for me to say, but I would say when everyone is trying to do something, do nothing. You know, when everyone else is trying to prove themselves and show off and show what a great artist they are, and they're attaching 12 things from their portfolio, just be simple. Say, you know, I'm interested in the position. Here's 3 samples. Let me know what you think. Because the people who are hiring, they're not only hiring based on your skills as an illustrator or your skills as a business manager. They're hiring based on people they want to spend 5 days a week with.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
You know
looking.
what I mean?
Yep.
50%.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's the
Yeah.
majority of it.
Yeah.
So
It's like getting married when you
Yes.
sit next to somebody. Seriously, like I sit next to this guy all he just left, and I'm looking for people, and I've got people coming in, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to spend more time with you than I spend with anyone else in my life. We're getting married, basically. So I better like you. You know what I mean? I
And you
want to
better
have
be
lunch
yourself,
with you.
You know, because it'll be so clear if you come in secure, content, grateful.
Yeah.
You will be chosen over people that are maybe even more talented, maybe more aggressive.
Very
maybe
true.
More,
Yep.
maybe better salesmen of themselves, but
So
just
this is a horrible lesson, and I'm going to share again more embarrassing moments from my life. So I was doing windows at Bergdorf Goodman, highly coveted,
Sure.
And
I love that. I love to do that.
Oh no, it was really fun. It was all hot glue gun. It was amazing, and it was like a really cool opportunity. I got to see collections before they went out onto the floor. I got to see like Alexander McQueen stuff before it went out. That was amazing, and I remember I was young. I was a little hungover, and I just could not get to work on time this one morning, and it was like the 10th time that I was late. And my boss looks at me as I walk in 15 minutes late, and he goes, just meet me in my office. And then he goes back to his coffee. And I'm like, oh, I know it's coming. And he sits me down and he goes, Andrew, you have more talent in your pinky than the other guy, but the other guy shows up on time, so you're fired. And he goes, I hope you take this lesson with you and try not to be late. I keep trying. But it was a lesson for me in trying to value what I had in front of me, and that there were other people who were depending upon me, and that I had an obligation and responsibility to them. And I am a talker, so it reminds me of another woman who I worked with, who was an intern. She was a PA, and they had a summer PA program with this agency I worked with for years, and she was amazing. She didn't have to learn that lesson. She was there before everybody else. And when we had to sit in a room and work together for 15 days straight, which is what I had to do for a pitch that everybody wanted, it was for Chanel, so everybody was killing to be on that team. We sat in a room with all the people that we loved and worked with every day, and sometimes argued with, and ate barbecue all night long, and some people smoked, and got this job done, and we helped to win this account. And this intern who showed up and got us barbecue and coffee and helped us out and did copies and all that stuff that was super unglamorous, came up one morning and she goes, hey, I have an idea. And I was like, what do you got? And she goes, well, what if we, and then she shows this idea of a mobile interface that tapped into the whole database of Chanel's color product line for all of their makeups. And you could shake it and it would actually show different products, and it would allow you to actually change the dress on this girl that you just took a picture of. And you could buy the products from right there. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of neat. Can you design some wireframes for that? So I want to tell you right now, that little piece of an idea from an intern helped to convince the CEO to give us a chance to actually win that $1 million account. And we got it. And we hired that person. And she worked on our team. That's because she just showed up all the time. So,
half the battle.
Yeah, man. So I love the question, though, that Logan asked, like, okay, so how do you explain how business and design come together? And then this other thing, kind of along the same theme, which is strategic design and management. I know, I hear that a lot. So what is that for you guys? As you've been out in the world working, what is that for you?
My advice on that front would be to concentrate on the fact that it's a BBA. We're all creative people, and we've been calling ourselves creatives for a long time. We all want to be fine artists underneath it all anyway. But the truth is, if someone were to, you can answer however you feel is best, but if someone were to ask you straightforward, tell them, I have a bachelor's administration degree, and leave a little pause, and then say, from the Parsons School of Design, which gives me not only one of the world's most coveted business degrees, but I also learn how to create and communicate my ideas, and
Yeah, that's what I emphasize.
but
I
that's
say,
the short of it without being too,
Yeah, I say I have a business foundation, and then you have a fluency in design, basically how I
yes,
kind
the
of.
design will complement your business degree.
And I think you can choose how much design you want to influence your degree. For me, I used very little of my business side and used all of my creative side for the first 20 years of my career. And now it's sort of flopped. Now I'm leading teams and managing creative people. So all of the things that I learned that I sort of didn't use, now I'm using so much more. So I think, if you're going to do something creative, it's how waxes and wanes, how much creativity will be involved in what you do.
That's true too. What I mean is that just to clarify a little more, if you're trying to be a art director, I would emphasize the creativity and the ability to finger paint, for lack of a better term. But if you want to give yourself the biggest number of options coming out of school, especially if you don't know exactly what you want to do yet, and marketing opportunities or sales opportunities or other things come up, the other people applying to those are going to be emphasizing their business ends, and the people looking at them are going to be looking at those a little bit more. So you have to find the right balance based on what you're looking for to emphasize one side of your acumen or the other. That would be my.
Yeah.
To be honest, he's actually right. In the very beginning, I was using, I was an art director. I was a creative director, and people would ask, "What are you?" I would say a creative director, and I would instantly kind of work on the arts side of whatever business-oriented project I was working on. But as you get older, the business side comes much more into play when you're an executive or something.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is, as you step into a role where you're managing teams and working with people, understanding how to, that class, managing creative projects and teams, like we just didn't put that there in the curriculum for fun or to torture you. That's to some degree we're trying to create a model for what you're going to end up experiencing out in the field, and that's pretty real. This is a new class; it wasn't here when you were here.
Yeah.
But part of that is I guess for me, looking at how things have changed even within the past 10 years in the industry, and I say industry loosely, fashion, cosmetics, marketing. I think of really thinking of brand, understanding of the branding is a big piece that touches all of your careers. How has the shift in technology and the to some degree the shift in attention span changed what you guys do? Because to me, understanding that is part of understanding strategy and then impacting design.
Well, speaking for myself, I feel like I've had to reinvent what I do a few times. In the early 2000s, the large majority of what we were doing was key art for film and music projects.
Right.
And of course, the key medium for those at the time were DVD covers, CD covers, record covers.
Right.
And this is a somewhat almost extinct industry at this point. I was making VHS box covers, yesterday, So what you do is constantly evolving with technology.
Yeah.
I assume that is the same in the fashion industry and in the beauty side of things as much as anything.
So if I could go to fashion, if you
Yeah,
don't mind.
I mean, basically there's so many jobs out there that just didn't even exist when I graduated, so it's a totally different playing field. And I think that, again, we know we're in a fast world. I mean, information is disseminating so quickly, and I think holding that attention of your customer is trickier because she's a lot savvier. She has access to information and her taste levels. It's different than me. I was going to the record store and trying to find things.
I still have records.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that
man.
it's how do you stay ahead of her, if it's a challenge, but how do you stay ahead of her but also be true to your brand is the challenge.
Well, can I ask you a question
Sure.
specifically about Victoria's Secret?
Sure.
So recently that brand made some big changes, and they stopped dealing with swimwear and leisure activewear, mostly focused on their core product line. Can you talk a little bit about how that is a strategic decision?
Right, it's not my decision.
No,
but
it's cool.
I like swimwear. But anyways, it's I think that, to your point, you do have to almost reinvent your business or your strategy constantly. I mean, things are moving so quickly. And I think in the realm of fashion, it's very saturated. And how do you stand out and how do you cut through the noise?
Mhm.
And I think the chairman of our board is very focused on not being great at a lot of things, but being really good at a few things. So for him, the focus is on bras, lingerie, sport, and beauty.
Right.
So it was he felt it was detracting from major growth.
So if you guys look at the kind of background of Victoria's Secret as an example, part of the Limited, they had a lot more
Yeah.
brands in that family before.
Sold them off.
Yeah, they're all
Express,
kind of
Limited, Abercrombie.
Right, so you can go to Express and get some groovy
Yeah.
shirts, but it's a totally different customer. It really didn't fit within the market paradigm.
Totally.
My husband works for Express. So for me, it's really interesting as a designer to understand those decisions, so that you're not just doing this in a vacuum, but you're actually designing with a purpose, with a customer in mind, with a market in mind.
Right, and I think that goes back to your question about understanding, the economic sort of implication, and having that business acumen is really important, because even if I'm on a design team, I'm partnering with the merchants and financial planners, or trying to understand what their goals are and making sure that the design is going to marry to that.
So thinking strategically, I think of MAC Cosmetics and their recent relationship that they set up with, oh my gosh,
Caitlyn Jenner.
Caitlyn. Okay. So thinking about that and understanding the heritage of MAC, it actually makes a lot of sense. But you have to understand the heritage of that and understand the brand and why that decision actually is suitable to helping generating more buzz and more income and hopefully launching a more interesting product line.
So the brand's motto is all ages, all races, all sexes. So it's the brand was started by two young gay guys in the 80s, and Madonna picked up one lipstick and it became a $4 billion business now. And it stayed true to its values. It embraces all ages, all races, and all sexes. And our office is an example of that. I think everyone I work with around the world is an example of that. And I think that's why I wanted to work there. It's really true to itself. And beauty wasn't even my first choice. I went there and I met them, and they really did what they said that they were going to do. And it's nice to work somewhere like that. And now I really like it. And so Caitlyn is obviously a great example of someone being true to themselves, and our brand supports her. I don't know if it will be, I don't know many women that want to wear Caitlyn's makeup, and I don't know many men that want to. So I don't know that it was like an amazing business decision, but it wasn't a business decision. It was a decision to be true to who the brand is, which in turn, keeps the brand honest and authentic.
So that notion of authenticity across any brand, whether it's in, what did you call it, label, liquor, I guess?
Well, sometimes we call it you're either on the label side or you're on the agency side.
Okay.
So it just means you're either kind of working for the client or you're working at the agency.
So let's say you're working at the agency side, as
Yeah.
some pathways might be for you guys. How does this notion of design and strategy and business play out in your relationships with the client? I worked on both sides, so I'll give you an example. When I worked on the label side, I worked on the client side. I had to manage a whole lot of design teams and make sure that they were actually hitting all the strategic points with the brand. I also had to kind of elevate and make sure everybody was talking to each other. So part of my job at that time was to essentially make sure everybody played well, almost producer-like. On the other side, I'm having to manage the teams directly and making sure that they're executing on the brand ideas that I'm getting from my client. And I'm also, in some cases, trying to move my client in a direction that maybe they're not comfortable with yet, but we think it's the right move. So sorry, I'm annotating, but I'm just curious, what are some examples that you could talk about being on
What comes
either
to
side?
mind if someone were to say, where does strategic design management come into play at our agency, and how does it differentiate us and make us more successful? Well, what comes to mind is we do a lot of work with HBO, and they get a lot of solicitations from a lot of agencies like ours that feel they can do everything just as well as us. And I think one of the strengths that got us that account and has helped us maintain it for 5-10 years is we design in series, meaning that like, a new project will come up and other agencies like my own might give them an idea and give them another idea and then maybe give them a third idea. And what we would do is, I like to think through some of the skills that I learned all long time ago at Parsons is we ended up getting that account on the Sopranos very early on. We do all the work for the Sopranos, the title treatment with the gun down I did and a few other things. But what we did on the pitch was we were already speaking to them about season 5, season 6, season 7, and we showed them how it's going to work as a franchise, work as a series, but also work on an individual level. And I think that was a degree of sophistication and organization and differentiated us from the other people pitching that sort of work. So I would think that, from a strategic level, you got to be a big thinker and think kind of even ahead on behalf of the client.
I mean, it's interesting. I know we talk a lot about sustainability. I'm going to switch gears for a minute. Talk about sustainability at Parsons, and I'm seeing lots of eyes roll already. But for me, one of the things that's interesting about that is that when you go out into the world, you're going to encounter companies who are wrestling with this. So an example would be, let's say, Nike, in a fashion and active apparel. They're wrestling with this, and Adidas as well is wrestling with this. And they create, in this case, let's say Adidas created that great partnership with Stella McCartney because they wanted to emphasize this part of their brand. And it was done, I think, very smartly. Nike is trying to do that on a number of different fronts. And I think what's interesting for us here, because we've baked a lot of that into the core of what we do, at least at the curricular level, we're hoping that you will go out and champion some of those ideas too. I'm just curious, does this even play out in the real world? We've been talking in a bubble and
About sustainability?
Yeah, how does that work with your
I'm
own
personally
brands?
super passionate about it, and I think that it should be intrinsic in the way you think, because I think going forward, the customer is going to expect, from a brand perspective, I think that the products and services that she buys from has an element of either social good or
Right.
has some sort of level of eco-responsibility. And I think it's a really difficult question right now because we're in fast fashion, right, cycle. You have your Forever 21s, your Zara's, your H&M's, which kind of goes against the ethos of what is sustainable, right? When you're producing that amount of clothing. So I think that it's going to be a really exciting time actually to be in sustainability, because I think that obviously we can't deny it. H&M has, everyone's got to kind of get involved now. It's do something, right?
They were just here.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They have a big Close the Loop campaign. But so I think there's actually a lot of excitement and innovation in this space, and I think it's really, really exciting. I'm personally would be going into that if I was your age.
I was just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be really exciting what happens.
I mean, I know it doesn't always necessarily seem apparent in every industry, but the message and ideas come up constantly. So I wanted to get to one of the questions that started the conversation. How do you go get a job? How do you distinguish yourself? We've talked about stuff like work ethic and showing up on time and being a good team player and not being a total freak. That's good. But how do you position yourself? That's kind of an interesting place to be. How do you present yourself as a strategic design and management student? Now, I might have led, like you, Casey, with my design work, and then strategy thinking and kind of, maybe a strategy piece. But I'm not sure where you guys are at. Like, where would you kind of want to tap into your own skills and experiences at Parsons? What's an example of something that you're passionate about that you want to get, go out there and present?
So yeah, I mean, a lot of us are on like group projects.
Right.
I know that's like one of the major parts of your jobs is managing like creative teams.
Sure.
And I feel as though that's something that since day one has been like a foundation of the BBA program is how do you function in a team and make sure everybody does their work on time without being like an authoritarian figure, which sometimes you have to be. And all of you guys, I'm sure, manage like creative teams. I'm curious on like what are your strategies for that? Like how do you make sure that someone gets work done?
For me, I just implemented something this year that the whole company took an example of, and now that each creative team is using it. I meet with my team. We're small. We're 10 people. We're like supposed to be the sort of nimble, agile team amidst the big corporate Death Star. But we do this thing where we meet all together every morning. So everyone knows what everyone else is doing, and you can see what everyone else is doing, so that if you saw a movie last night that's cool and has inspiration that could be used on something else, we can cross-pollinate ideas very easily. And I think that everyone really likes that, because you may get stuck working on something, boring for 2 weeks or not the most exciting, but you can still, if you've got exciting ideas, share them with someone else. So we do that, and we have a web-based status document that we all update, so everyone updates where they're at with their project, and they upload the most recent version of the creative on it, so everyone can review and share ideas. I think that's the biggest. I think that's what you'll have. Going to this school, you're going to have the benefit of being able to communicate better, and I think that, especially visually, I think that you have to capitalize on that and show that. Lead with that as the way you differentiate yourself in an interview or on your resume or whatever you bring. I think that's the key.
So yeah, building off of that, people that are on your team, I'm sure there are a lot of junior level people. How do they present ideas that they come up with to you? You're the head.
We do. Well, I have a creative director that I present to formally every Tuesday and Thursday. It's a more formal environment than I've been accustomed to. So we're working to present that. So my team, at the end of every day or in the beginning of the day, they show me what they're working on, and then I just check in with them very casually. Like if I know someone's struggling, or if I know someone needs an idea or needs help, I'll put two people together. So it's a little more casual, but we formally present to the creative director.
Yeah.
Building a little bit on that, what are some of the biggest challenges you guys have had with managing a team? Has there been something that you've really had to tackle seriously, or even when dealing with clients, has there been something where you really had to put a lot of effort into it and you potentially learned a lot from the encounter?
Well, I think that the only way that you can manage others is first to learn how to serve yourself. I mean, I know it's an old cliche that in order to lead, you need to know how to follow. A lot of you guys are going to be at that stage come next year. I encourage you to learn how to be a good follower, because you will find that you have bosses that you're inspired to do things for almost without them asking, and there are taskmaster type of bosses that you can't wait to screw them over for one reason or another, and you don't care about this job anymore, and etc. So to answer Logan's question, not enough emphasis goes into the power of character as a leader. You have to be a role model in the most classic way. We talk about having to show up and doing this and doing that. You have to be a role model in those ways. You don't have to be there before the people that are rushing to get there before you, but you just have to show people how to approach work in the near term and the long term in a balanced, positive way. And if you're able to do that, the best people on your staff, the aide-de-camps that you trust the most, will want to work for you. You won't have to order them to do anything. There's a difference between saying to someone, do this, and having a group of people who you carry such weight in terms of respect for all different reasons that all you have to say is, gee, I wish someone would do this. And next thing you know, people are sort of competing for your attention, and in terms of leading groups, I would encourage you to sort of create a dynamic where people are inspired and willing to work for you rather than telling them what to do.
Yeah, we talk about it in my company, the shadow you cast, building upon your point, and how important that is and the responsibility you have. I think being a manager too is something that it's an organic process. It's not it doesn't necessarily always come easy, especially as creatives. I think it's something you have to learn and maybe model after, and I think having a mentor is really important, and identifying someone early on who you can glean from and who you immediately notice you like the way that they lead, or you know, their work and their work ethic. And I think identifying and having a mentor relationship could be really beneficial as well.
I mean, it's interesting because one of the most important people in my experience of working was a person who works in a career that I don't necessarily want to work in. This is an entertainment place I worked at. But she was the best manager I ever worked with.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really admired about her is that she made sure that everybody got credit. That was
Yeah.
really remarkable. And you had people who were really low on the totem pole, but if they showed up and did the work, they got credit. So that to me was admirable, and I've tried to continue to bring that into my own work.
You know what? That's actually an incredibly important point, especially for people who are a little bit younger, and you know you're just dying for credit right now. You know what I mean? The more humility you approach it with, the more you give the credit to others, the more you don't care about the credit whatsoever, the more that your superiors will appreciate your work. At my agency, one of our big, you know, we don't have a motto, so to speak, but something that comes up in every introduction or first meeting is, and an aspect that helps us get a lot of work comparatively to other people is, we like to say that we let the client's work do the talking. You know, everyone is always trying to kind of put their own spin on something. You know, we're trying to do a campaign for something. You start thinking of ideas and you come up with something. The truth is you should take what the client is trying to sell and actually almost add nothing to it. You know, no credit for yourself, no credit aesthetically for, you know, and believe it or not, it sells the product best, the client's the happiest, and they come back for more because they know you're not in it to brag. You know, my firm does no advertising whatsoever. We rarely take credit for things on the side of packages or anything we do, and it's served us very well. You know, our highest competition also are a few other firms, and they don't advertise either. You know, so there's something to be said about just letting the work speak for yourself, letting people come to you, stuff like that.
Shem, what's up?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I took out of BBA program was the ability to find a problem and finding a leverage point and solving that problem with design thinking. And design thinking being such a vague, kind of like, and a very new kind of topic. Right now I'm currently working at a user experience and customer experience research and design agency. And when I often, as a salesman and as an account manager, and when I often work with big companies such as you guys, Victoria's Secret, MAC, Zenco, like the hardest part of my job is kind of explaining design thinking and teaching user experience and teaching customer experience. I was wondering, how has those kind of like plays, like design thinking plays, played in your company, in your workplace, amongst the work that you do, or you know, internal organizations, stuff like that?
That's a great question.
Well, I think that, as I was going to say, as I said before, though, that's what separates you from anyone that went to Harvard or, you know,
NYU.
right, NYU, wherever. The fact that you are coming at it with the history and weight of being at a school like Parsons, where creativity is so valued and pushed. This is the way I think about my career. I feel like no matter what you asked me to do tomorrow, if you said tomorrow you're going to go design cars, granted I may not be the best car designer, but I would know that I could step into that position and at least do some semblance of a decent job. Or if you have a creative mind, you trust your instincts, and you're already going to approach the situation different than someone that only has a design degree.
Or only a business degree.
Or only a business degree. Sorry, only a business degree. So I think that by sort of exercising that, by exposing yourself to as much art, design, fashion, music, pop culture, as much of that stuff as you can, it's going to separate you, and it'll serve you. Does that make sense?
you're not going to be in exactly the niche that you think you're going to go in. You know, just to think of a random one. You know, you might think you're into fashion, and you might graduate, and you might end up in fashion years from now. But for now, you know, you might be sending out resumes, and something might come back from Condé Nast or something, which has a variety of fashion publications. And next thing you know, technically, you're really working in magazines. You know, but you're using your fashion knowledge, you're using what you learned in Parsons, and you're applying all the foundational lessons to any endeavor that you find just in front of you. You know, someone asked, how should you separate yourself and how do you get a job when you get out of here? The truth is you shouldn't be very picky. You should try and almost industrialize the process of looking for jobs, just to give yourself the most options. You know, sometimes on a browser or whatever mail program you use, you can have signatures. You know, you should set up signatures for some of the different niches that you might be working in. So when you come across something, you literally just go to your email box, you pull down your signature, your cover letter's already there, you switch it up a little bit, you send it. And that way you can do 20 in an hour, instead of thinking about, man, I really want this one job that I saw online that, you know, I hope they give it to me. And you cast yourself a wide net, take what comes, and I mean, this is truly your path. And like I said, the things you do in the next year or two are not going to define you, but you never know, they could turn into something much bigger than you could imagine. I mean, that's how it was for me. I was working at an agency. My dream was not necessarily to work in advertising per se. But I was doing that work, and it got noticed by Chris Blackwell in Rolling Stone magazine, you know. And he did his research, and he found out who did it. And he called me up, and I started working directly for him. So, and I thought I wanted to kind of work in film. And meanwhile, I was working at Snapple at the time. So, you know, on the Snapple account. So, take what you can get and do the best you can, like a team player, because every single micro assignment you get, there's room to do something a little bit special that you can be proud of.
I think it was interesting thinking about, you used the term design thinking, which when I first heard it, I got like an allergic reaction. I'm like, what do you mean by that? You know, designers don't think, what do you mean? You know, and partly that's because I come from a very defensive design education myself. But, you know, what's interesting about it, if you separate the jargon and all the nonsense, what it is it's a series of methods, and it's a way of approaching a problem. That's all, you know. And what that's given me as a designer, is I can go into, you know, a giant financial institution, or I can go into a Lowe's Hardware, or I can go into Chanel, and I may not necessarily have all the expertise to understand, you know, the nuances of that beautiful beaded edge, or that gorgeous quilted jacket, you know, that they're designing, or, you know, the crazy plumbing section over at Lowe's. I don't know that depth, but what I do know is how to actually ask questions and try to like pull out really interesting information that we can then act upon and design for. So an example would be Lowe's. You know, years ago I led a team, and Lowe's was going through some changes in their institution, and they asked a couple questions. They asked, well, you know, where will we be 5 years from now? And we were like, okay, that's a fun question. And we kind of went wild and tried to envision what was happening in technology. And we came back to them with this pitch of where they would be in 5 to 10 years. And what was really interesting about it is the conversations that were generated out of that research and insight. What happened was you had people in their branding group, and you had people in their IT group who almost never talked to each other. I'm not sure if they even liked each other very much. And we got them into a room, and we did this little dog and pony show and showed them where they could be. And the IT guy jumped up and he goes, I've been talking about this for 5 years. And the branding guy's like, I love that idea. And then they had lunch together, you know. And several years later, some of the things that we presented in that deck actually became real for them. So for me, that was exciting. Now, is my name on it? No, it's not at all. Is the agency's name on it? No. Lowe's name was all over it. But I was able to step back and help them actually solve a problem. I walked out of there feeling pretty good about myself and about the work that we were doing. And there are a lot of different channels and places that we can do that. I gotta ask you. Sorry, Sarah. I'm just really curious because you're in fashion in particular. Not to ignore you guys. I love you guys, but fashion's going through a bit of a shift, and there's a big like retail's kind of freaking out a little bit. How do you respond to giant paradigm shifts in the industry that you're working in without running around with your hair on fire? How do you respond to that?
Right, well, there's a lot happening. I think
Yeah.
that the relationship between the store and the digital space,
Right.
right? And we are, as our company, we're so penetrated in, stores. We have
Right.
1,100 stores, most malls you go to has Victoria's Secret. But I think now, we talk about reinventing the business. I think that you have to look at the retail store has to offer a different experience than what you can offer online to make it worth it for the customer to go into the store. Is there some form of entertainment, or is there some level of service that she can't get online? So I think I love that's part of my job, is not just like looking at trends and what sort of new product direction and ways to position and brand things, but also to look at what's impacting our customer's life. How is she going to shop differently, or what's her lifestyle like that she is going to dictate a new product range. So yeah, I mean, and it's hard at a company that size to move quick,
Right.
and action on those things. So that's my role, is to convince them
That they need to move.
that they need to, keep it moving.
Right.
So,
And I ask you that question,
Yeah.
not to put you on the point, but
Yeah.
it's kind of, okay, when we were presented with a brand that's
Sure.
dealing with a changing
Yeah.
landscape and how people are shopping
Right.
or spending their money, how do you guys, as people who've studied research and studied managing teams and studied trends and studied marketing, hopefully a little bit of it, I know you guys did because I've worked on the curriculum, how do you respond to that? So to me, a little bit, it goes back to this question of how do you present yourself? So when I was on the other end at the agency hiring people from Parsons and elsewhere, the people that I got most excited about were the ones who came in who had done their research on who I was and what this company was about. And
Yeah,
what
don't
our
even
clients
bother if you don't
were.
do that.
Yeah, you show up prepared.
Don't even bother if you didn't do that in a way,
But also came in with really interesting questions. Not like, oh, how many clients do you have? No, I don't want to answer that question. But really interesting questions of like, I've been looking at X technology. I worked in digital branding, and its impact in this brand or in this sector is happening here. What do you think about that? I want to have that conversation because it's related to the industry that I'm in.
Right.
Or if something's shifting in the way that creative directors are leaving in droves from big brands, and what does that mean for the industry? Or the big fast fashion turnaround. I want to have that kind of conversation with a young person who's coming in to actually go and work in this industry. I want to know that you're interested.
Right, having a point of view, I think, is really important, right?
Yep.
We've still got a little time. You got any more questions? Yeah.
I know that technology and fashion together is a really, really, really big shift right now, and the word of the day basically is omnichannel shopping. So how that has influenced the job market, what are the new opportunities, and so on and so forth.
I went to a panel at South by South Interactive where this guy said, it's not omni-channel, it's just shopping. That's all it is. So,
That's really funny.
I think that it's just, I think it's, like I was talking about before, there's new jobs that are being defined all the time, and you have to be nimble and agile to sort of adjust and rethink your strategy. And technology is, moving at such an exponential rate that things are completely obsolete, so I think it's just constantly being aware, doing your research, and even if you work in design, I read Fast Company all the time, and I think having that digital fluency is critical. I mean, it doesn't matter what company you're gonna be a digital company in some respect. So I mean, I think we had there was no social media team, probably 7 years ago or 6 years ago. I don't know. So I don't know if that answers your question, or if I see new jobs. Yeah.
Can I
Yeah,
follow
sure,
up
sure.
the question? So let's say you're hiring people for developing a new product that is related to omnichannel shopping. what are the qualities and the skills you're looking for in the people when you're hiring them?
I don't personally hire people who
Yeah.
are doing user experience or web development or things like app development, but I would imagine to be somewhat of an expert or to understand that the fundamentals of that, to know what's new, what's happening. I think curiosity is critical.
And again, I think I've been interviewing for a role for the past 3 months. I've met a lot of people, like 10 people a week, and I think that what separates some people from the others is their ability to just try something or explain how you can parlay something that you have an interest in or passion about into what that role is. So, for example, if you're really, telling something personal about yourself that relates to that position or something personal, knowledge that you have that relates to that position will help. So you probably have no omni-channel experience, but if you have, experience interning somewhere or a class that you took, explaining how that relates always is helpful.
Or if you could think about how that's applicable to the brand, I think is taking it a step further. Probably putting the brand lens or wherever you're interviewing at, having that as the focus, not just the sort of technology standpoint, but also how that relates to the brand.
I remember I was interviewing a bunch of people for a user experience position that dealt with, among other things, social media, but they didn't know that. It was just user experience. And it was really interesting. This guy, he was a Parsons student, came in and had this really excited, fun conversation about data visualization. Now that might make some people snore, but he was so excited. It was so infectious that the first person who interviewed him literally said, "Hold on," ran down the hallway, grabbed me out of a meeting and said, "You got to meet this guy." And then I did that as well because this guy was so exciting. We offered him a job right on the spot because his ideas were interesting, they were relevant to the time, his work was really compelling, and his attitude was completely infectious. And he worked with us at this one agency for 5 years, then went on and ended up doing a TED Talk years later. He's more famous than all of us, But it was the sense that he took a project that was really important to him, and he invested the time to actually develop it. And it was that was really interesting for me. So you may be leaving the school and not necessarily have a huge portfolio. I would say for me, the lesson that I learned from this young person was he took the time to actually develop a project for himself, and then came in and showed it off. And that spoke volumes about him.
I would say that's a huge part of it as well. When it comes to hiring, I'm much more apt to pay attention to someone that is trying to run their own business, not on the side, but maybe as their passion, or if they've gone through the trouble to get their LLC started up and they got something sort of on the side and they'd love for that to turn into full time, but they're here today to interview with you. Those are the type of entrepreneurial, passionate, self-motivated individuals that you feel like you could trust to not, to do more than the minimum and to represent you the way you want to be. And just to add to another point that you said about data visualization, that's actually a very up-and-coming field that touches on almost every industry. And I think that actually answers, what did you say your name was again?
Sure. Yeah.
That answers your question a little bit, because I think that's a perfect example of how design and business can come together. I mean, data visualization should be the type of thing that the people in this room are experts at, because that is really the hybrid between the eyes and the mind, you know what I mean? So, if any of you see any data visualization jobs come across your feeds, I would encourage you to jump in it, because it's an emerging field. It really is.
Yeah.
It comes up a lot. People don't, at meetings and things, people would much rather see it now. It sort of is like passé to be going through Word documents and outlines and stuff in meetings. People now are doing data visualization, and I've even seen people that they hire true illustrators and cartoonists and stuff to do their meeting materials.
Yeah, we
Because
just hired an animator
Yeah.
to do our fashion recap so people could see what social media was used in what cities, and everything was animated.
We have we have people who do interactive maps and mind map visualizations that are used to sort of working on children's books and maps for Epcot Center, showing how the families get around Epcot Center, and now they're being used in the office more, sort of explaining projects, how we're going to get from here to there, and it makes your staff understand what you're getting at more, and
That's how Airbnb created their business model, is that they knew they wanted to be part of, the shared economy. They saw that was happening, but they didn't know what field. And then they came to the idea of, hospitality, and they hired a guy from Pixar to basically storyboard out the whole process from the person, posting their house to the guest leaving.
Right.
So that through drawing that out, they were able to make their whole business plan by seeing holes and
Right.
where there was opportunity or things to leverage. So really interesting.
It sounds
Yeah,
like
that's
design
great.
thinking.
to build on again what you were saying about how does design and business sort of come together. What you want to be when you get out into the world, no matter what you're doing, is you want to be a storyteller. Meaning no matter what idea or what industry you're working in, you want to be able to step back and talk about where you've come from, no matter what client you're dealing with or even your own work. You want to talk about where you've come from, where you're at, and where you're going. And being able to design the story or the mythology behind your ideas. That's actually what I wrote my thesis on in my 5th year. Some people were doing ideas on how they're going to open their own labels or their own magazine or something. Mine was actually about, this is going to really bore you and get off topic here, but there's a man named Joseph Campbell who's a philosopher, and he calls himself a mythologist. And what he does is he studies all the myths of the world, all the stories like the Bible and from this culture and that culture. And he wrote a famous book called A Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is about how every story you've ever heard is actually the same story. It just has different names for the characters and different symbols within the stories, but there's always an arc that's always the same. And it's about how the human psyche is attracted to the particular stages of this arc in a way that we don't even know. So my thesis at the time was about how you can apply, there's a whole science behind his philosophy, but there's different stages called like the call to adventure and the trials and the resurrection. These are kind of like ambiguous names, but they represent sort of different stages in the mythology of every story you've ever heard. And I was talking about how, in a McDonald's commercial, if a girl is looking up and Ronald McDonald skates over and gives her the French fries, and suddenly she has the power to go out there and skate, and that's the 30-second commercial. It sounds so contrived and simple, but it's actually it's touching on something very deep in our psyche. So to get back to my main point is, no matter what you're doing, whether you're trying to get a job, trying to sell a pitch to a client, any project that you're attempting to master, learn to tell the story in a comprehensive and integrated way. 3 paragraphs is all you need. If you're not doing it right in 3 paragraphs, you're not doing it correctly. Because if you're doing that correctly, you should be able to land any pitch, solve any problem, be elected to anything you desire. 'Cause it's about telling the story about where you've come from, where you're at now, and where we're going. And it relates to leadership also too. If you're a leader and you're ever, everything is moving around you and you don't know what to do and everyone's looking at you, take a deep breath and think about where you've come from, where you are, and where you're going, and that will help you get a grip on whatever you're trying to do.
It's interesting. It reminds me of a creative director I worked with early in my career. So I probably wasn't much older than you guys at the time. And I worked with this guy who was really into wabi-sabi and Japanese aesthetics and rustic kind of design ideas and Japanese architecture. This was part of his culture, and it was part of his whole embodiment of how he looked at design. And for me, what was so fascinating is that he was so eager to share that story with us, and he was able to look at the projects. This was a digital branding agency I worked at. Look at the projects through the lens of this fascinating aesthetic history. It was not Joseph Campbell's, who's, by the way, great. There's a whole series of TV episodes you can watch of him. But
Yes, it's called The Power of Myth.
Yeah,
if
it's
you want
really
to look
cool.
into it. It was a life-changing,
oh, sure.
field at the time.
And this notion of aesthetics and ideas permeated the way that his creative director led. And I've encountered a couple different people who I've worked with who kind of were able to interpret the projects and had a worldview with a philosophy or an idea. That was fascinating because it helped me understand how someone sells an idea or discovers an idea and then relates something maybe in more lay terms that a non-designer or a non-tech person or a non-topic expert would understand. So part of that for me, the takeaway that I had was, look at your own life and look at what's rich in it that you can actually use and share as you're starting to build relationships, build credibility, build trust, whether it's with an interview or a relationship with a team member or a client. I feel like.
Do you still study Maslow in the program?
Yeah, sometimes. I don't know, John. Do you
So-
still study that? John
Of
saying
course,
yeah.
except we add a thing to the bottom of the pyramid that says Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Forget about all the
Right on,
other
man.
levels of acquisition.
Because that's actually one of, I remember everything from school, as you could imagine, but
That's
of
true.
all the things that I particularly remember, it was the idea of self-actualization and, your own as a person, your own as a professional, and following the different benchmarks and steps of your own journey.
I will add, we talk a lot about, the myth of the hero's journey. I know that anybody who's been in my classrooms knows actually I was having a conversation with Kevin just today about it. And Jonas Sachs, the founder of Free Range Studios, his book, Winning the Story Wars, leans heavily on Joseph Campbell.
Yes.
Joseph Campbell was, very influential in Star Wars, as we all know. Star Wars is directly out of a Campbell idea of, the reluctant hero that goes on a journey.
The story was designed. You know what I mean?
Designed.
Joseph Campbell sort of uncovered the design behind story and mythology, so it can kind of be used almost as a proactive tool. My thesis, I think it was called, Myth and Method, the Science of Business and Belief, and it was just about how you this is a silly example, but you could spend your whole life trying to build $1 billion fashion brand, or you could just come up with Star Wars. You know what I mean? And it's a very powerful discipline. It has humongous and exponential implications for anything you do, including the design of your own life.
But it's interesting if you step back and think about, particularly Victoria's Secret and MAC as examples, or the brands that you've worked with, James.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of them has a story that resonates, this notion of credible history and kind of staying true to that. Or even looking at your own product line and basically honestly assessing and saying, you know what, this doesn't belong anymore. And making that decision that affects jobs and money and all sorts of stuff. This is about actually being reflective and really thinking about the larger picture of a brand. And not just the numbers, but the actual spirit of something. That sounds a little hokey. I worked in branding, so forgive me. But I actually think there's something real there. And for me, a lot of that is about you guys going out into the world and learning how to build a credible relationship with people, whether it's your own company that you start, and I hope some of you do that, or it's a brand that you're working for, or an agency that you're helping multiple brands. I think one thing that's really interesting to me in being alive and designing and dealing with this world today is dealing with the changing attitudes of how people have a relationship to a brand. Things have shifted. it was, I guess to some degree my own generation and maybe my parents' generation, there was kind of a reliance and maybe a little naivete in a relationship to a brand. Oh, Tide, I'll just use Tide because I've always used Tide. That's not the case anymore. And in some cases, I'm actually really excited that you guys and my nieces in your generation, so my niece tells me all sorts of stuff all the time. Oh, they're so full of, So I think the sense of cynicism and willingness to, as a consumer, as a citizen, to engage and have a conversation and maybe even challenge a brand is really interesting. It's really challenging for brands because generally brands are uncomfortable having that conversation. But in some ways, it's a great opportunity to build a real relationship with someone, one that's actually a dialogue, not just a monologue. So I'm going to give you one little anecdote, and this is an example that kind of touches on like what kind of jobs are out there, So I worked for this big financial institution. Their name rhymes with Shitty Bank, and there was a website called shittybank.com that really exists, and my job at Citibank was to deal with user experience, and one of the things that we would do every Thursday is we would have a meeting with all sorts of people representing all different parts of the company. And one of the groups was the customer service people. They were down in the Southwest, and they would get on the phone. They were like, "Oh God, this Citibank website is so annoying. They're just complaining and saying all sorts of awful stuff about us." And of course, the lawyers were like, "We need to shut it down." And the marketing people were like, "Well, what if we actually joined that conversation?" So we set up a program and we asked one of the people from the call center to actually monitor the site. And if someone came on that was a customer and they were complaining about the brand, that you could actually intervene, introduce yourself, give your phone number, and have them call you, and we would solve your problem. Now, this might seem like a small issue, but it was a way of either being really negative and shutting it down and being monolithic. No, you can't talk about it. They're going to talk about you anyway. Or we can engage in a conversation. I'm going to give you another weird little anecdote. You know who Courtney Love is, right? She's so glamorous. Okay, so she got a dress that was a knockoff Chanel from her publicist. Did you ever hear this story? And everybody made fun of her, and they were like, "Oh, you're so stupid. That's a knockoff." And it was interesting. I had a little privy conversation with someone who was working at Chanel, and they said, Karl Lagerfeld was really upset. But he didn't express it. He wasn't verbal about it. What did they do? They actually took the actual dress, they put it in a box, and they mailed it to her with a nice letter from Karl saying, "See the difference?" And then they did this whole PR skit around it. But it was, for me, it was this interesting opportunity where here's a kind of a funny place where we are in a moment where our consumers and citizens are talking back to us, maybe even teasing us, making fun of it, critical of us, in some cases valid criticism. And we can either ignore it like some brands do and hope it'll go away, or we can find opportunities and jobs and positions and ways of responding to it, maybe changing, maybe doing a more sustainable practice in the way we produce things. That's all about this conversation. I think it's exciting because to some degree I look to your generation as the generation that's sparking that kind of movement. I think you guys can change things. I'm really excited for you.
I want to be cognizant of time for our guests, and we're coming up to 8:30. I know that you've been in a Q&A moment, but I guess if there's a last burning quick question for any of our guests, this would be the time to voice it.
So you guys have been in the field for a while, and I was just curious, do you ever run into your peers?
Do you ever want to what?
Do you ever run into your peers?
Your fellow
Because
students.
From school?
I had to interview a few alumni for one of my classes, and the most common thing that I kept getting was that you actually don't, which is like, I didn't know this because people are like, "Oh, it's such a small world, you're gonna run into your peers," and they're like, "I don't know anyone in my school."
I've never run into anyone I went to Parsons with. I mean, socially, I'm friends with them and look for them, or I call them if I need something, if I have a favor, a friend works at somewhere to get a discount or something, but not, or, hey, can you get me numbers on something? Can you tell me how the company's doing? Because I know you work there, but no, not for me.
Same for me.
I'm friends with a select group of people from that era, and you know, I guess we all kind of went our own separate ways for a little while, but now with the rebirth of social media and a lot of things, I mean, you at least get to kind of see what everyone else is maybe doing, and you have the opportunity to connect with them or stay connected or to network professionally with them, depending.
But leveraging other people's that you know or that do, you know, that are excellent at a certain thing, maybe that you're not, but fostering those relationships and knowing when to capitalize on them or, you know, hit somebody up for a favor or, I mean, that's you know, key in business. So
I think I run into my former colleagues from other jobs more than I
Yeah.
run into my former students.
I've run into a few professors,
Yeah.
more so than the students. I know that's kind of goes against what you're saying there, but I remember and
Yeah.
run into my professors more often than, you know, everyone in my class, so to speak.
Sean, did you want? And then we'll go to you. Okay.
I just have one question on your last comment. I almost always think that our BBA degree is almost like a BBA degree with empathy. Like we're able to empathize with our end consumers.
Yeah.
And when it comes to your companies with MAG, Hudson & Co. and Victoria's Secret, when you guys design, are you guys thinking about the empathetic end user, or are you guys designing more like, I'm gonna create something crazy, just like what Apple does. I'm gonna create something crazy, and I'm gonna let the world empathize with the product. So is that two
Can I take
different
this
ways
one
of
first?
thinking?
Pretty funny.
Just real quick. The truth is, what we tried to touch on in the beginning, you're not going to be able to design, quote, crazy for anybody. Depending on the size of the client and what you want to do, a lot of your day-to-day thoughts and efforts are going to be in, and we spoke about this word earlier, but since it's the last question, I'm going to throw it in there, just give you something to think about. Office politics, okay? You know, not all your ideas are going to be the ones that other people want. Even if they're the best, there are going to be people in the room that are just tearing it apart because they want maybe your job, maybe, you know, the dynamics of everyone and different things. So what you want to do is you want to balance all the variables of your job, and as far as you can, give it your own flavor and do the best for the company as far as you understand it. But there's going to be a limitation to that. It's going to be a collaboration, and if you're caught being too opinionated about the validity of your own crazy ideas, it will stunt your growth and your rise in the industry professionally. You know, there are going to be times, it's an important point that hasn't come up tonight, is you're going to get rejected for jobs. You're not going to understand why. Sometimes you really deserved it, and like I said, it's because maybe they're picking up someone internally. Maybe, you know, everyone has their own peccadillos in life why they hire people and don't. So you have to stay true to yourself, let the rejections roll off your shoulder, industrialize your opportunities by going out for everything you can. You know, wait until you get the opportunity to decide whether you want to do that job. Don't pick and choose and say, all right, I'm going to go for these 3. I'd say go for those 30 and deal with what comes back. You know, there's a difference between hunting and trapping. You know, if you go out hunting one by one, it's not as easy as it is to leave the trap and let the right thing happen and come to you.
But to the antithesis of that, I just want to say something, because I started my own company when I left school because I wanted to just be super creative and not sort of worry about the politics of business just yet. And I think no matter what you do, I think you said this before, but create something yourself so that you have created something solely and without sort of influence of others. And then when you go to a job interview, you have that thing to talk about, and you have that thing that's solely yours and who you are. And try that. I think that jumping right only into business and only being in politics is great, but it needs to be tempered with your own sort of freewheeling a little bit when you're right out of school, in my opinion.
Yes, and it'll also make you feel better about if you're not working in exactly what you want to work in, or if you're not getting approved for the things that the way you think it should be done isn't as smooth as you'd like it to be. If you do have your own company, if you're doing something on the side, you won't feel as compelled to sort of define yourself every second by what you're working on at the office creatively, and it will allow you to not be too passionate one direction or another. You know, do your job, show up, do the best you can, add the most you can to the value of your company and your supervisor's portfolio. But don't get too caught up in trying to define yourself on whether, you know, something at work. Your creativity and what you do on your own should really be your passion.
I mean, it's funny because I'll be honest with you. I've worked in both environments. I worked at Citigroup. I worked at New York Stock Exchange. You know? It's very hierarchical, lots of rules. You know, and I've also worked for myself, and I've worked in really insane collaborations. You know, and I've actually really enjoyed the latter a little bit more. But I also learned a lot from those really hierarchical situations, so there's something to be learned. You know, I wouldn't devalue either one. But I do think of like designers that I really admire, like Tibor Kalman or James Victore, both of whom take this really radical, transgressive take on the way that they work and who they will work with. And out of that kind of decision and out of that kind of position that they've taken as designers, and in this case, business people, they've made a practice that's actually worked for them. So there's something to be said for standing your ground. Now, you had your hand up, and I think that's the last question.
It's perfect that you guys mentioned that, because my question was actually in alignment with those of us who are kind of inspired to start our own thing after graduation, don't necessarily want to go the job route, want to start our own businesses. What advice do you guys have for us, just generally speaking, that could be helpful to keep in mind?
Do both.
Taking that.
You know, there's nothing stopping you from starting your company and having it be online tomorrow.
And look at what other people are doing successfully. There's this restaurant called Dimes on the Lower East Side, and these girls have started a small little empire in a one block. And then there's this yoga studio called Skyting, and it's like 4 girls. They're all friends, and they've all started these small businesses. And just by being really true to their brand, knowing who their brand is, having an amazing brand story, and living in very authentically with their brand, they've created an two amazing businesses just by being very true to themselves with a partner and support. But I don't know, check out what other people are doing, and they're doing well, and what you like from each one of those things, and Frankenstein your own model together.
So you want to say one last thing, Sarah?
Well, I haven't started my own business, but I have friends who have. But I think you're right about being curious, and I think there's so many resources anyways out there, and actually going, there's amazing panels and talks and websites I always look at for entrepreneurs that are just amazing, I don't know, references for you to be inspired by.
My agency in particular started when I was still working at Island Records, and I was in touch with a few other people in my position at a few other places, and we would fantasize about, hey, wouldn't it be great if I just left here and took some business from here, and you left there and took some business from there, and you know, and we started an agency. So, you know, there's a certain something to be said about leaving school, getting a job, trying to build a resume, trying to get some names, you know, maybe even some recognizable names just for the point of it. But there's nothing stopping you from underneath it all when you get home at 5, you know, building your own small empire one chip at a time while taking a paycheck for something else, which is what I would advise for all of you. I wouldn't jump into solely thinking you're going to start your company in June and it's going to be a smashing success. I would show up to work. You're going to learn a lot in the office, most importantly, and we've all emphasized that, I think, more than enough. You're going to learn how to deal with other people in a creative but professional way. When you're here right now, you do things, you know, everyone kind of passes, everyone gets along. When you get out there, there are people that aren't as talented as you and aren't as talented in communicating as you. So, you know, you're going to have to, you know, they're coming at, you have to know how to deal with people that aren't even good communicators. So you have to, you know, deal with people that are better than you and worse than you and be able to, there's most of your experience does not happen in the classroom. It will happen in the next 5 years until you're about, I don't know how old any of you are, I don't want to assume to, but, you know, until you're in your late 20s, there's a lot to understand about yourself and how to work creatively with others. And I remember that firsthand. I mean, I've made many mistakes in my life. I said things in the office I shouldn't have said in the beginning. I was very passionate about this was my moment to make my name at 23, you know, after I've been there for 2 years, this is it. And the truth is, it's not. The best thing to do is to, you know, do the best you can with every piece you get and to slowly accumulate a reputation of quality and skill and trust.
Hard work.
And,
Yeah.
and as a hard worker.
That's
you know,
just
and
the base.
Grateful is a big quality too. You know, if you don't act like you're grateful to have that job, it's going to be obvious to everyone around you. So genuinely be grateful you have any sort of job at all, because if you've ever been in a position where you really want one and you can't find one,
That sucks.
you'll be you'll understand, you know, you'll understand that what you used to have was probably better than you thought.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Sarah, James,
You
Casey,
too.
thanks so much, and thank you guys for showing up tonight.
Thank you all.
Thanks for this.
Of course. I hope.
No, I hope so too.
Nice to meet you as well. I'll send you an email. Maybe we can figure something out one way or another.
I love hearing you talk.